the thing to remember about California, everybody, is it is the most lawful and lawless state in the nation. It is the most regulated and unregulated, because if you have 21% below the poverty line and you have 27% of people who were not born in the United States, and you've got 1 out of every 3 American welfare recipients here, you can't possibly follow all of these arcane regulations.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. And the mumbling Victor Davis Hanson. I won't tell you what he said. This is Jack Fowler. I am the host of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. I'm happy to be, proud to be. And we are recording on Monday, the 24th of March. This episode will be up on Thursday, the 27th. The aforementioned Victor Davis Hanson is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. He's also the owner of a website, The Blade of Perseus, victorhanson.com. You should be going there early and often like they vote in Chicago. Victor and we just recorded another show. We had so much to talk about. A lot of it has to do with California. Victor just wrote a big essay for American Greatness on California, but there's also this really disturbing, if you're a Democrat, poll. There's also some really terrible Democrat lawmaker antics in the Assembly. Big surprise. We have, what else are we going to talk about? Victor, Democrat rallies, Bernie Sanders and AOC's rallies, and just who is attending them. Some really fascinating information about that. Lawfare. But, we're going to start out with the revocation of Joe Biden and other security clearance.
I'd love to talk about that.
I thought you would, Victor. And we're going to get to that right after these important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. So, Victor, the President of the United States, when Donald Trump revoked the security clearance for Joe Biden, his entire family, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, many others, Blinken, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Liz Cheney, the usual, they rounded up the usual suspects, and they are all sans clearance. Victor, what's your thought of why this matters?
Remember, they yanked the Bidens yanked Trump's security clearance. So part of it's tit for tat, but let's examine. So why would you yank the former Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken? Maybe because he's never really answered for the fact that in 2020, he called up the former interim director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, and said, can you round up some people because Joe is going to speak on October 20th. And the election is coming up in less than 10 days, and they've got the goods on Joe because they've got this laptop, and it's got pornography, it's got drug use, but most importantly, it's got references to Joe Biden as the big guy and Mr. 10%, and we've got Tony Bobulinski and other people who are confirming that the messaging that references them is accurate. So we need to, and the FBI has this, and I don't want to get into what they found, but we need a counter narrative right away. And so then Morale says, okay, get the usual suspects. Let's round up the perjurer, James Clapper, who's lied under oath about spying when he was director of national intelligence. We'll get the other perjurer, John Brennan. He lied about collateral damage and surveilling as CIA director, the staff computers in the Senate. Get in Leon Panetta. He'll always be useful. Mike Hayden, remember, he's the guy that called Trump the architect of an Auschwitz-like death camps on the border. So he's a good guy. And they rounded up 51 of them to lie and say that this had all the hallmarks. Didn't say it was all the hallmarks of Russian information, meaning we think that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are colluding again. And that's what Biden said. I went back and looked at the tape. That's all he did. 51. And so why would you want that guy? He's untrustworthy, Blinken. That's completely extraneous to all the things that happened. The disaster on Kabul, the turning over of the $1 billion embassy, the $300 million base, 30, 40, 50 billion in weaponry and vehicles to the Taliban, the Chinese balloon trajectory with impunity, the whole pressure on Israel. See, that's Ukraine. That's just what he did. Now, and Hillary Clinton, I would say that Hillary Clinton she committed a felony when she destroyed her devices that were all under subpoena. Mr. Comey himself said among the 30,000 emails, there were some that were classified that she also destroyed. Said they were about yoga and stuff. If they're about yoga, then why not just let them be read by the FBI that had subpoenaed them? And then, of course, she hired a foreign national to work in her campaign or for her campaign, which is illegal, when she paid Christopher Steele through the paywalls of DNC, Perkins Coie, and Fusion GPS. Then, of course, she said that the election was illegitimate. She's called for all sorts. Said she was a member of the resistance, et cetera, et cetera. So I could go all of them, but you can see why you wouldn't want any of those people to have a security clearance. And I think there's way too many security clearances because they're being monetized and they're leaking. So they get this information and then they give a wink and a nod before a camera, and they're either getting paid because they do have these clearances and they're so-called experts, analysts on cable news, or there are people like Leon Panetta who didn't have the intestinal fortitude to come before the American people and say, I lied to you. That I knew that laptop was authentic. You know it's authentic now. Led you. He's never said that. So all of these people, I think we're giving way too many security clearances, and there's too many leaks as it is. So in general, fewer the better, and when people have tried to subvert the law in the past, then they don't deserve any special deference. And Joe Biden, of course, he yanked Donald Trump, so maybe he started a precedent. The thing about the left is they never believe that, they don't believe in these cosmic forces of nemesis, and the Greek version or karma, and the Indian version are populist narrative, what comes around goes around. They don't believe that. They think they're so morally and intellectually superior that no one would ever do to them what they do to other people, and it always comes around.
Why would Biden get it anyway, given that the last
what would he
maybe
do
4 years of he outsourced every thought he had, every signature he had?
Don't you remember when Hunter was being paid those astronomical figures for
painting?
Well, I mean, he was giving expertise advice, and no one ever really knew why Joe Biden for 30 years had all those classified documents, because he wasn't really writing his memoirs until the latter part. I don't know how many times he's written his memoirs, more than once. But I think the impression was that they were loosely in his house, in his library, in his office, and Hunter had access, as you saw in the garage. So the idea was that Hunter, with a wink and a nod, can say, look, I have this knowledge about Burisma, Ukraine, and Russia. So I think the whole Biden family was trafficking on the idea that Joe Biden had taken illegally classified documents and they were in the family domain and people had access. The picture of the garage thought any Biden could have gone in there and got one of those collapsed boxes, which was, again, ironic because, remember, everybody, the FBI, when they went into Mar-a-Lago, they took 13 to 14,000 documents. They found 102 that were classified, 0.007. And so unpersuasive they were afraid that raid would be, when they tried to justify it, that they took labels with them. It's top secret, classified. And then they took the files and scattered them on the ground and put little sticker labels next to them and had to orchestrate.
Is
exactly. And nobody had to do that with Joe Biden's garage. It was pristine. Or as we say in archaeology, it was in situ. It wasn't moved. All you had to do was take one picture of Joe with his Corvette showing off and see those boxes in the background to see that Hunter had access to them. Should he wish.
The Cabana boy had access to them.
Everybody did. The ghostwriter, remember the ghostwriter? Yeah. He was narrating, Biden was giving him information, and he recorded it, and he destroyed that subpoenaed tape. Robert Hur, who I really don't have a lot of respect for, to be candid, And he said that, why did you, that was subpoena. We wanted the tape to see what you were doing with access to classified information from Joe Biden. And he said, oh, I just erased it because I was afraid I'd be hacked. So that was kind of convenient timing. He been indicted for destroying subpoenaed evidence, but he got the Hillary Clinton treatment.
Right. Okay.
Everybody should listen to this. I'm not being bitter or I'm not trying to be on a rant, but you got to remember something. We just talked about Judge Boasberg giving an exemption when he was in the FISA court to Kevin Kleinsmith for committing a felony of doctrine. It's not what Donald Trump did. They got him on overvaluing Mar-a-Lago to get a loan from the Deutsche Bank, which he paid back on time and with a sizable interest profit for the Deutsche Bank. And the Deutsche Bank not only had no complaints about the evaluation of the collateral, but said they would have lent him money again. Fannie Willis, until her whole case exploded when she lied about her paramour, Nathan Wade, and everything. We've got to remember, everybody, that was a phone call where he says, find me these votes, meaning I think they're there. That wasn't a smart thing to do, but people do that all the time. That was the felony. E. Jean Carroll, I don't even need to get into. I've written so much about her crazy, nutty, wacky ideas and her story that never made sense. And then we get to Alvin Bragg. So what did they do? The Fed said, everybody has non-disclosure forms. Big deal. This thing is over a decade old. So what? Oh, well, I'm going to you're not going to prosecute, Fed? Well, I'll make a state law and say that, he had a non-disclosure form and he didn't report that as a campaign expense. Maybe it was because he just was like most businessmen that are high profile, that have something they're maybe ashamed of, and they pay somebody not to discuss it to protect their families, and it has nothing to do with campaigns. That's an argument. That's what the feds apparently concluded when they chose not to prosecute. And then you know what? I get so angry because it's so Mr. Cole Angelo, the guy that was the third highest in the Merrick Garland DOJ, came to the DOJ because he was working as a federal prosecutor and trying to teach the dullard Alvin Bragg how to use a state law to be a surrogate for the feds that wouldn't prosecute. And then when he did his damage, he went to Alvin Bragg to do this, and he came from the DOJ after he had worked for Letitia James. So here you have a guy going after Trump, getting that big settlement to bankrupt him, going into Merrick Garland's DOJ, then saying, you know what, it's November 18, 2022. Today we appointed Jack Smith, federal prosecutor. Today Nathan Wade and Fannie Willis's boyfriend is in the White House. We're instructing him and Mr. Coangelo, get back out there and do with Alvin Bragg what you did for Letitia James, all the same day. That's why he's angry. That's why everybody that Donald Trump is angry. And that's why he doesn't think those people are deserving of normal accordance or treatment.
Well, we've talked before, and we'll talk again later in this episode, this podcast, about not only lawfare, but the broader threat, which is now being called big law. And Donald Trump has taken action against several law firms themselves. And I've got a very fascinating analysis of the big law's efforts on things, and that Donald Trump and his administration are focusing on this are important. I saw your Hillsdale colleague this weekend past, Bill McClay, who's just the loveliest guy.
I like him. He's written a wonderful textbook, Land of Hope.
Yeah, which
gives people a whole. It's very valuable. It gives people in K through 12 chance to learn the truth.
Well, I think there's going to be an aggressive effort. I heard from somebody that maybe Encounter is going to be really pushing this that book as a textbook.
It's just soaring in sales. It's been wonderful. His son is also a classics professor at Hillsdale.
Oh, wow. Anyways, he's just the happiest warrior too. So Victor, before we go on to some of these other topics, I did want to, you mentioned Tony Bobolinsky, and you would go back in the time machine to think, wow, not only did these 51 people lie. And not only was the New York Post cut off from the rest of the world,
Miranda
social
Devine's
media.
truth. She was speaking the truth, a lone voice in the wilderness.
Yeah. And Bobulinski had that, I thought, profoundly important interview with Tucker Carlson at the time. And I don't think the FBI ever dealt with him, ever.
No, because they had the Hunter laptop hard drive. They had the whole thing in their possession, and they knew it was authentic. They'd verified it, and they knew what the Biden administration was doing, telling everybody that it was a product of Russian disinformation. They knew that the whole intelligence community, at least as represented by 51 of these, their best and brightest, was lying to the nation to warp a debate and thereby an election. And they didn't have the guts to come forward and tell the truth. James Comey knew it. He knew it. He had the FBI. He had the laptop in 2000. I guess it was Christopher Wray by then, excuse me. But he had the laptop, and he knew it was authentic, and they kept mum about it.
Well, Victor, we are going to move away from laptops and to the golden state of California, where, my gosh, things seem to be churning. Let's take two angles on partisan politics in the state. First, we'll talk about some hijinks of Democrats in the Assembly. Then we're going to take a commercial break, and then we're going to go on to some really interesting polls. So, headline: California Dems are nervous about Republicans speaking out and taking control. It's this article states that Democrat leaders, despite their party's absolute control of California's government, are acting nervous and snappish about a handful of Republicans speaking out on important issues. A couple of weeks ago, Republican Assemblyman Esalyi, I don't have his first name, was one of the 5 outspoken Republicans who were removed from their committees late on Friday night by the leader of the Democrat supermajority in the Assembly, Speaker Robert Rivas. Why? No misconduct was cited. The GOP lawmakers were bounced after they publicly questioned Democratic policies and government spending. Victor, should we be surprised?
No, because everybody should remember what California is. It has no two-party system. It's a one-party state. There's no other state like it in the country. There is not one single statewide officer who is a Republican, not the lieutenant general, not the attorney general, not the state controller, not the governor. I think there's only 11 or 12 of the 52 congressional seats are Republicans. There's a supermajority in the House and the Senate, state Senate. We haven't had a Republican governor since Schwarzenegger, and that means that we've had now 8 years of Jerry Brown and 6 years basically of Gavin. So we've had 14 years of judicial appointments. The whole judiciary is basically left-wing at the Superior and Appellate and State Supreme Court, and that's not enough for them. So now they have to silence the majority in the legislature and kick them off committees. And why are they doing this, and why now? It's because the state, as I speak, started out with $76 billion in the hole. That's very hard to do, Jack, when you have a 13.3 income tax rate. Your sales tax is among the top 10 in the nation. You have the highest gas tax in the nation. And in addition to that, although in theory you have a 1% property tax, there's all sorts of exemptions, and the assessments are so high with California property. It's among some of the highest property taxes, and they're broke. And then you can't talk about any of these things. People, if you say, why are percent of all the births in California on welfare Medi-Cal? Why? What's going on? Why are 40% of all Californians on Medi-Cal? And why is that program $7 to $8 billion in deficit? And where's the money going to come from? Why do we have the highest power bills in the United States? Why are almost a quarter, 20 to 25% of our power customers are not paying their bill? Why is that? Why do we have 1 out of every 3 people in the United States on public assistance in California? Why are our schools that used to be in the top 10 and the bottom 5 as far as test scores? So if you want to ask those questions, they don't want to discuss it. What's happened, though, why you're getting this paranoia is this was all a scab. And there was what I just described was a putrid wound. And then a series of events tore that scab off. Precipitous was the fires in Los Angeles. And they were unique because that affected primarily upscale left-wing voters in the Malibu Pacific Palisades area, among the most beautiful area, most affluent, got close to Brentwood even. These were the most left-wing but also affluent people. And they had no one to blame because the mayor was left-wing, the deputy mayor was left-wing, the head of the L.A. Power and Water was left-wing, the fire chief was left-wing, the deputy fire chief, and they all were in various degrees culpable for this preventable fire that destroyed one of the most beautiful communities in the United States. And now they're looking, some of them are looking in the mirror, Jack, and they're saying, I did this. I voted for these people. I voted for Karen Bass. I knew what type of person. I voted for the city council that didn't have one Republican on it. I understood that the deputy mayor was calling in bomb threats, allegedly. I know that the water and power woman was incompetent. I know that that reservoir was dry at the top. I know the hydrants, many of them were not working. I know that all the fire department talked about the last 4 years is LGBTQ hiring and DEI. I know that. I know about the winds. I know about the chaparral. I know that they wouldn't let you even remove it. This was all because of human agency of the people that I voted for because I was so affluent and so wealthy and so protected from the consequences of my bankrupt ideology. It always fell on other people. High gas prices? Let those suckers in San Joaquin or Parlier deal with it. High sales taxes? Let that guy in Fresno deal with it. It has no money. Regulations? Let that poor painter in Reedley, California deal with it. But not those people, because they had that utopian open borders, boutique, California Coastal Mission. Oh, the voters voted $7 billion to build 3 big reservoirs to give us 5 million acre feet for the first time in 50 years that would save the state during a drought. Let's just use $250 million of that money and blow up 4 dams, which they did on the Klamath River. That's what this state is about, and they know it now. So there are polls coming out, and one came out yesterday.
We're going to get to that
So
briefly.
that's the problem, and they know that the people, they thought that their attitude was 27% of the people were not born in the United States. They haven't been assimilated. They haven't been acculturated. They haven't been fully integrated, and we have nursed them from the moment they came here, how horrible this country is, and how much the wealthy, they. And the problem right now is there's not enough theys anymore. They've left. 1% paying 55% of the income tax. They're leaving. And their attitude was, well, there's always these rich fat cats, and we're always going to be able to guilt trip them, and they'll always have enough money in Silicon Valley, Hollywood, you name it, farming. We can always get this money out of them. Well, they're leaving, and they're packing up.
I don't see much news in the last couple of weeks about post-fire. Is there any? And Trump went there, right?
The general rule in California about the fire, as in everything, if there's no news, then someone of the opposite political party's doing some good. And that's mostly Donald Trump has threatened to put conditions on aid and said suspend various regulations. And they've been very rapid trying to get rid of all of this burnt material and flotsam and jetsam, and they're making some progress. But now they're up against the system that and these are building regulations. The thing to remember about California, everybody, is it is the most lawful and lawless state in the nation. It is the most regulated and unregulated. Because if you have 21% below the poverty line, and you have 27% of people who were not born in the United States, and you've got 1 out of every 3 American welfare recipients here, you can't possibly follow all of these arcane regulations. So basically, you make all the regulations for the people who follow the rules, and then you get psychological benefit to enforce them with that group, and then all the other people can't do it. So if you have 1/4 of the people can't pay their PG&E bill, what are you going to do? You can't can't cut off your power. And how could they when they're paying how could they pay their bill when they're paying up to 35, 40 cents a kilowatt, highest in the country, because these people on the coast, instead of building a nuclear plant or another natural gas plant, or instead of keeping the hydro plants going, they do things like, let's shut down Moss Landing, that big natural gas oil, big producer of electricity, and let's put batteries there. So all this excess solar, we don't know what we're doing. It burned up. That doesn't matter. Let's just rebuild it again. It burned up again. The batteries blew up. And it's just a bunch of wreckage now if you drive by it. So and what do they do that? Let's finish the high-speed rail. We spent 15 to 20 billion. It's going to cost 300 billion. It's never going to get built. But we are going to show the world that you can go from Bakersfield to Merced in about 45 minutes or an hour quicker than you can on Amtrak. That's the mentality. They're incompetent. They're incompetent.
That 300 billion, is that a figure that's really
that's
now
for the
being
whole
bandied
700?
about?
It wasn't originally, but that's to finish the 750 miles from Los Angeles all the way up to Sacramento, and then have a lateral over Pacheco to get into the Bay Area. But it's never going to happen.
Right.
They're incompetent. All you have to, everybody, when you have a population and the schools are ranked in the bottom 10%, and they inherited one of the most sophisticated, complex systems in the world. I mean, gosh, we had these, what gets me so angry and why I'm animated is that generation that we trash and we call racists and xenophobes and homophobes, and they created this, junior college system that fed into the state college system, 23 campuses that fed into the 9UC that was anchored and partnered with Caltech and Stanford and USC. And then in addition to that, they transferred all of this water from the wet north to the parched south with this aqueduct and penstocks and hundreds of reservoirs, and had the most sophisticated airports, and I-5, 99, they were all ahead. And then this generation took over, last 2, and just sat there and said, these people were polluters. They weren't sensitive to the environment. They weren't sensitive to LGBT and trans. They weren't sensitive to reparation. And they just milked it, and they didn't invest, and they squandered money. And now everybody knows it. And the biggest problem they're having right now is they don't know what to do about the Hispanic population, because about half of all the people who came illegally the last 60 years from across the southern border came to California. And that, if you're a humane society and you want to give parity to people who are dire poverty, often working a minimum wage, then you have to offer health, housing, food, legal, educational subsidies to give them some semblance of a parity. Well, they did do that, and it was an enormous drain. And people who were paying the taxes over the last 50 years and looked at the public school system and crime, and they just said, there's better places. And so I don't know how many have left, but there's been estimates of 5 to 10 million people in the last 50. They just left.
I as an East Coaster and in love with the beauty of California,
it's hard to make paradise into purgatory.
Yeah. Why would you leave? If I'd tell you, you'd leave because it's going to drive you broke and violate your conscience.
But now the left doesn't know what to do, because the Hispanic population is in the 2nd and 3rd generation.
Yeah.
And they're middle class and upper middle class, and they're not all left anymore. And they're looking at what's happened, and they're saying, I don't want to pay for this. I work very hard. I shouldn't have to pay 10, 12% income taxes, 10, 12% sales taxes. I can't afford the property. And I don't want all these people on public assistance anymore. And I can't afford the power. And I don't like this new Green Deal agenda. And all of a sudden the left is saying, oh my God, they're supposed to be silent Democrats and they might vote Republican. So the polls are showing.
There's some really important numbers. We're going to reveal them when we come back, Victor, from these important messages. We'll get back to the show in a minute, but first let's talk about something that's affecting all of us. The dollar isn't as stable as it once was. Interest payments on our national debt now exceed our entire military budget, and if you're paying attention, you know traditional retirement strategies might not be enough anymore. That's why we want to tell you about American Alternative Assets. They specialize in helping investors diversify with gold, a physical asset that's preserved wealth for centuries while paper currencies have come and gone. What makes American Alternative Assets different is their simplicity. You can transfer funds from your existing retirement accounts, 401ks, or IRAs. No taxes, no penalties. If you're ready to explore gold as part of your retirement strategy, call 1-888-615-8047 or visit VictorLovesGold.com and use the code VICTOR and claim your free wealth protection guide. That's 1-888-615-8047 or visit VictorLovesGold.com and use the code VICTOR and claim your wealth protection guide that they're offering to all our listeners. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. We are recording on Monday the 24th, and this episode is up on Thursday the 28th. Victor's website, The Blade of Perseus, is you'll find it at victorhanson.com. Do subscribe. It's $6.50 a month, but discounted $65 for the full year. And you're going to want to do that because twice a week, Victor writes an exclusive piece for The Blade of Perseus and does an exclusive video. And I would calculate these exclusive articles probably to about 2 books of wisdom a year. Of course, links to everything else Victor does, writes, podcasts, appearances. So go there, The Blade of Perseus. So, Victor, these polls I've been taunting people with here on the show. KABC poll. New polling released shows voters across California are feeling what is being called the Trump effect, rejecting years of Democrat policies. Nearly half of likely California voters say they would consider voting for a Republican for governor in 2026. As a reminder here that the party Republican registration in the state is just 25%. Now, here's the laundry list of anger and outrage over ongoing policies. 83% say gas prices are too high. 73% support fully funding anti-crime Prop 36. 72% feel homelessness still a big problem. 71% believe the Democrats in charge have not addressed the state's high cost of living. 69% think Democrats in San Francisco have not done enough to bring down energy costs. 62% support a full independent investigation of the recent Los Angeles wildfires. And the last one, only 24% of Californians think males, transgender, should compete in female sports. Doesn't seem like there's any upside here for Democrats.
Well,
Victor.
no, I mean, what did Gavin Newsom did? The first thing he did was court Donald Trump to give free money to prepare the city for the Olympics, and then he set aside $50 million to sue Donald Trump and stop all of his reforms. And, of course, then they said that the state was going to resist the transgender and schools would have biological males dressing in front of young girls and destroying women's sports. De facto doing that, and they're behind on every issue. We had a reparations committee after we were flat broke, and we have about 3 to 4% African Americans. We're 8 generations of civil war. This was a free state, so we have 27% of the state wasn't even born in California. So basically, Gavin was going to fund that, and that basically said, we're going to take money from people who never owned a slave. Not one person in the state had an ancestor probably that owned a slave. And we're going to give it to people that have not had any experience in slavery for 860 years. And we're going to do that at a time when we're 78 billion and our highways are rated among the bottom 5 in the nation. And that's the mentality. And it was all based on 3 things. Just very quickly, Jack, how we got into this. Number one, we had open borders. And the Hispanic population is very hardworking, but when you're coming from southern Mexico in the second or third iteration, and many people, millions of people were coming up here without a high school degree or English language fluency or capital, and many of them under illegal auspices, that was an enormous task and the types of jobs that were offered were not those that gave health insurance, housing, affordability, etc. So you had to have a huge increase. If you look at the Medi-Cal, as I said, when you have 50% of the population on Medi-Cal, and you have, 40% and 50% of all the births, we were spending about 50% or 40% on education and infrastructure, and now you're spending on social welfare. It was an enormous change. The second phenomenon was you got $9 trillion in market capitalization in Silicon Valley. And so this left-wing area, the world wanted their Google searches, the world wanted their iPhones, the world wanted their iMacs, the world wanted to get on their social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and the money came from 7 billion people in the world. It gave them $9 trillion, and it created gods on earth. They felt that they were masters of the universe, and they had these agendas, and they thought, I live in Malibu, I have a $50 billion home, I have a $500 million boat, I've got all of this stuff, I'm worth 10, 20, $50 billion. What else can I do? I know what I can do. I can remake society according to what I think it should work, because I don't have to pay a mortgage, I don't have to pay a power bill, I don't have to fill up for gas. I don't worry about that. So they created an agenda that no one else could afford except themselves. And they propped it up. And then they were the proverbial the goose that were laying these eggs, and the state went after them for the money, and all of a sudden they started moving away. They said, Tesla's moving, and then finally we had this Ronald Reagan, George Dikmajian, Pete Wilson, Arnold Schwarzenegger, 32-year of Republican voters, and they left. They said, I'm not staying here. No way. I've been to Idaho, I've been to Nevada, I've been to Tennessee, I've been to Florida. You get better schools, better roads, streets, balanced budgets, better health care. I shouldn't say this, but
go ahead.
I'll go ahead and say it because it's factual. When I was younger, Stanford Medical School was the top medical school, maybe in the West Coast, clearly, but among the best. And when I was a graduate student, if I went into the emergency room, and I did once, it was amazing. And they had the top, as I said, when I had members of my family that were very ill, I consulted with people there. And I have an ophthalmologist I think is probably the top ophthalmologist anywhere. And I'm very lucky because, she spotted a problem I've had. That said, I have a very close former family member that went in for sciatica and died in that hospital in recovery. I have another friend from high school that went in there for a heart valve and died 3 or 4 days later. I have another friend who just went in there and they were put in the hallway. And I've been to that emergency room today. It's nothing like it was. It's just nothing like it was. They've had a DEI program at Stanford. It's just not if you are very ill and you think you're going to go into a Stanford hospital room, unless you're very wealthy and very famous, or you're a faculty or somebody with connections, and you're going to be Stanford Hospital 1975, 1985, 2000. No. This state is not the same state. It's had to, I'm not blaming Stanford. They have to assume all sorts of obligations that never existed before. When you have 50, as I said, 50% of the people on Medi-Cal, So who's going to pay for this sophisticated? Are you going to tell somebody who came across the border and comes in there and their daughter has a glioblastoma? Are you going to say to them, no, you can't afford it? No, you're not going to do that. That's savage. So you're going to provide that care. But if you have a lot of people that have never gone to a doctor before and they need to have, that is an enormous task. But the point I'm making is nobody told us that. Nobody told us that. Nobody said we have to have legal-only immigration and has to be measured because we have a lot of poor people here, and they came here legally. And when I go by and I talk to people in my community that are U.S. citizens and they're not getting the health care that they used to because the system is swarmed. And you can't just have 12 San Francisco, that's a million people, just throw 12 million people into the southwestern United States. And
layered onto all that, Victor, I saw on Bongino the report, which is an aggregator of news articles. It's an article in the Daily Economy, how Congress created the doctor shortage. So we have these, forced issues that open borders bring, and then we have forced shortfall in actual doctors. And it's one thing, Victor, when you were talking about how you would have envisioned the emergency room in 1975. It made me think of air travel in 1975. Well, air travel is something selective, and we've tolerated the decline in standards from traveling 30, 40 years ago to what they are today. But when you have to go to a hospital, you have to go to a hospital.
No,
and same thing here. Yale is nearby. It's saying, Yale University, Yale Medical School.
It's just nobody wants to talk about it because they're scared that it's politically toxic, so you can't talk about it. But it's sort of socialized medicine. It started with Obamacare, but I have a specialist, I won't even say what type of specialist, that's a wonderful doctor. And when I go for my I would go for a yearly checkup in his specialty, it was one of the most thorough things in the world. And it was set aside 20 to 40 minutes. And when I made that appointment, I could get in, and if I had a problem with something, I could get in. I've had 3 operations in this, just kidney operations. So my point is, if I go in there now, I'll be lucky to be there 3 to 4 or 5 minutes at most, and I will wait an hour and a half, and the waiting room is packed, and he's heroic trying to deal with all the people that he's flooded with. If I go to a cardiologist, it's just insane. And so it's all done by the very wealthy who were exempt, and they didn't care about it. I guess we call it the Martha's Vineyard syndrome, when that iconic moment when Ron DeSantis sent people to Martha's Vineyard, and they all came in their puff coats and little care boxes, remember, and said, oh, this is wonderful. Well, oh, by the way, you've been here 4 hours. I think it's time for us to send you to New York or Chicago. Well, those are the people who created these rules. The whole system, when you look at, I always ask myself, what happened in the Western Empire in, 450 or 470? Why didn't they keep going like they did when people were coming across the Danube or the Rhine, or people didn't believe in Romanitas anymore, or keeping up the traditions that had started with the Italian agrarianism? You'd see the whole thing falling apart. And that's what I'm really worried about right now in certain areas of the United States, but particularly California, because this is the sixth biggest economy. We had everything, the most sophisticated agriculture. We had the most sophisticated tech sector. We had the Bank of America. We had, we had some University of California, Berkeley, UCLA, USC, Caltech, Stanford. We had the highest. But when you tamper with that system, and I'm not talking about race necessarily, but when you say that you're going to let in 9% of Stanford for 3 or 4 years without SAT scores, and you're going to discriminate against white males and Asians, but especially white males, 9% of the admitting class when they constitute 33 to 35% of the population. And then you're going to say that, what are you going to do? You're going to have people who have no record of a competitive SAT score or a competitive GPA, and they're going to have to water down the courses or do what they do, give 75% A's, and that's going to filter back to the employer and to society at large.
And how the roads are maintained and
see, what I'm getting at
is
I didn't make the standards. I didn't. You didn't. People listening didn't make the standards. They did. They said that if you want to go to Caltech, or Caltech's kind of an exception because they're back to normal, but if you Stanford or you want to go to Berkeley or you want to go to UCLA, then this is the SAT that you should have, and this is the GPA that you should have. I didn't make those rules. The faculty made those rules, the faculty governance, because they said, oh, I'm teaching upper division Spanish literature, and I need to have this type of student. Oh, I'm teaching computer coding. I need this type of capable student. And then all of a sudden to tell us that was all a lie. Those standards were arbitrary. They didn't mean anything. They were racist. They were sexist. They were homophobic. We don't need them. We'll just just drop them all, and we'll let in people based on their superficial appearance. And then all of a sudden they're saying, oh my God. And then now people say, well, if you destroyed your own standards, we have no respect for you. Why should we respect you? We only respected you because you had these superior standards. And every time we met a Harvard or Yale or Stanford graduate, they were very impressive and they were at the forefront. But now they're not. We see what people at Cal State Fresno know. You don't chase Jewish students around campus. I taught there 21 years, and I don't think that any Jewish student on the Cal State campus was ever in danger. It took somebody at Columbia or Yale or Harvard to really threaten Jews. So this elite is completely bankrupt. And you know what another thing is we're not talking about, Jack, and I mentioned it very quickly, the fertility rate. If you look at red state fertility rates and you compare them with what the fertility rate is in New York or California compared to somewhere like Tennessee or Montana or Wyoming, it's very different. And when you add migration, we're into the biggest migration since the Oklahoma diaspora, maybe the 19th century immigration.
Right.
When you've got all of these people moving, millions of 4, 5, 6 million people are leaving Illinois, Minnesota, New York, California. They're going to Tennessee, South Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, Texas, the old Confederacy. I mean, they were economically behind the country, and all the places of dynamism, the West Coast, the Northeast, the North Midwest, they're all stagnating. And there's something about this blue state model of childless. I don't know if it's support for abortion on demand, or it's agnosticism and the combination of atheism, or this crazy emphasis on careerism and titles and, oh, I went to Stanford, I went to Harvard, you've got rat race idea. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't lead to fertility.
No, I think this...
Did you see that interesting article, Jack, that if the current fertility rates continue to the next census, that there's going to be 10 congressional seats that go from blue to red states, along with the electoral college votes.
Well, you're saying for areas like this where I live, I think it tracks pretty much, Victor, with godlessness. Oh, we'll call it worship. And that tracks with the nuclear
they never think
family
of the consequences. So when AOC says she doesn't want to have children because she'd bring them into a polluted world or a hot world, or you get screaming throngs about abortion, we got to have 1 million abortions. They never say to themselves, well, there's a historical law at work that if you get down below 2 and you get down into 1.5, 1.3, your population is going to get very, very elderly and need a lot of help, and there's going to be very few people to help them, and these societies crumble. And that's what's that's the subtext of the blue state implosion.
Yeah,
people are leaving, and the people that are stuck there are not having children at the same rate as more conservative people are.
Victor, for years I've been involved in the pro-life movement. I once asked, and it's too daunting a project, but Nick Eberstadt, the great demographer, he's at American Enterprise Institute, suggested, would it be interesting to do a study on what if there had not been 75 million abortions in America? You just think the first abortions are 50 plus years ago. I would wager the United States would have well over 500 million people, and it's a big damn nation that can accommodate a lot more than that. And all the teachers bitching and moaning, we don't have enough. There'll be plenty of students to be there'll be need for teachers and need for so many things. It'll be so much more vibrant nation. But instead, we have a culture of death, and it's not only abortion. Now we have getting rampant euthanasia. What is going to happen to these?
Where do these ideas come from? I know, but where do they come from? If you trace,
devil, I think.
And every bad idea, and I say this as someone at the university at 18 and graduated very well at 17. I was 17 when I went as a freshman, and then I spent 2 years in study in Greece, but I finished 26, and then I took 4 years off, but I've been in academia ever since. So I know it. I've been a visiting professor at the Naval Academy, at Pepperdine, Hillsdale. I was a Nimitz visiting scholar at UC Berkeley. I've seen it all. And I've spoken I was thinking that the other day, in the last 40 years, I probably did at least 6 to 7 universities a year. So I was probably spoken at 300 of them. My point is that this is long overdue, what's going on that Donald Trump is trying to do. People do not realize what's been going on at these universities. They have institutionalized anti-Semitism in the elite universities. They have been hiring administrative staff like crazy. Stanford has almost as many administrative staff as they do students. They have let the faculty completely be indoctrinated. There is no control over the content of the courses. The faculty senate, they censored Scott Atlas at Stanford. They still haven't relented on that. They haven't lifted that censor. They are so wealthy. Just a few years ago, we talked about endowments in the millions of dollars, but the idea that they would be so partisan, they would not respect the First Amendment of the United States. You cannot, if you go to a campus today and you give a lecture about pro-life lecture or a pro-Israel lecture or a pro-drill baby drill lecture, they're going to stop you. If you get accused, you go on a date and you get drunk and you're accused of sexual something, you're not going to have Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, or Sixth Amendment. I've seen it happen. You're not going to have those rights. And if you think that the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, 65 apply, they do not. There will be separate graduation. Maybe they'll say the official graduation is for everybody, but there will be racially segregated additional or auxiliary graduation, racially segregated dorms, it's completely out of control. And that's where a lot of these ideas come from. So the idea that the best thing in the world for an 18-year-old is to go to the university, and if they're not really well educated, to major in psych or sociology or this studies class or that, and take 8 to 10, 12 units, kind of take a quarter off semester here to half time, get a federal loan, maybe get up to a couple $100,000, welch on the loan payment, quarter of them due, and then just eat up your entire 18 to 25, 30, and kind of a student, kind of a not of a student, kind of working, kind of not, kind of living with somebody, kind of not, kind of married, kind of not, kind of renting, kind of not. And then when you look at that other group that had a very antithetical paradigm, and I'm talking about the people that were born, say, 1915 to 1930, what was their attitude? I'm 17, I'm an adult now, it's the Great Depression. I'm going to come home from high school and milk cows. I'm going to come home from college and work as a carpenter for the summer. I've got to get married 21, 22, 23. I'm not saying this was ideal, but just talking about historical terms in terms of fertility and productivity. And then to have 2 or 3 children in the baby boom, and then our leaders, our elected officials said, I'm going to get these people, and they lived through the Depression. They defeated the Japanese, the Italians, and the Germans. They're coming back here. We're in a Cold War. I'm going to make sure they can afford a house. We're going to build lots of houses, lots of dams, lots of power. We're going to give the middle class a shot. And people, they were adult by the time they were 25, 26, 27. They had children. They had owned a home. They had no debt. And it was a noble idea that you were an electrician or a plumber. Then we got I don't know what happened, but in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was, wow, this cynical nihilism. You got a BA. I have a master's in sociology. That kind of whole, and we just deprecated people who worked with their hands. People were productive. People who saved for a house. People had 3 or 4 children. People in the military, and that's been part of the norm. So the Democratic base of that 20% or 25% that you see screaming at meetings and yelling and angry, that goes nowhere. That model goes nowhere. That's a defund the police model. Let's cut off all of the plentiful food and energy and housing. Let's have that's no more disinterested academic, empirical education. Let's be it's destroying things, and they know it.
It's a hateful ideology.
It's when Chuck Schumer said that, basically. He said, why are you angry at me? I'm sending people into red states and red districts to disrupt these people, make life tough for them, and I'm trying to appoint judges to stop this by fiat. This is the guy, again, who shouted it by name at the Supreme Court justices. So this is a nihilistic thing, and the only thing that's kind of, I don't think they've come to terms with the blue state model, that it leads to bankruptcy and mass flight. And every time a person leaves Minnesota or Illinois or New York or California, the burden is increased on the person who stays. And
they're doubling down, Victor, and I think we've got a little time left here because I know we got a hard stop coming up, but I think it would be interesting to look at a rally in Denver and who's there and what this means for the Democratic Party, and get your thoughts on that when we come back from these final important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor, there's this, I don't know who he is. It was a very fascinating X post by a guy named Tony Saruga. And somehow or other, this has to do with this AOC Bernie Sanders rally in Denver that took place the other day. And I think if you see it, you're watching like, oh my gosh, they got 30,000 people out there. It's like, is there some populist wave happening, Democrat wave happening? Well, this guy, I'm kind of afraid a little bit because they have access to your phone, but he says they found the GPS data and tracking, and they said at this rally of allegedly 34,000 people, what they found was 20,189 devices, so an inflated crowd size. It said this is not shocking, 84% of those devices present had attended 9 or more Kamala Harris rallies, Antifa BLM, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protests. So they're professional or quasi-professional protesters, and 31% of these people had attended over 20 such rallies. And it says they do some further analysis that says 90% of the 84%, so I think that's like 70% of the folks there, were likely working with one of these 5 groups, and these groups are Disruption Project, Rise and Resist, Indivisible Project, something called the Troublemakers, and the Democratic Socialists of America. Most of them, Victor, funded by your tax dollars. 3 of these 5 are nonprofits, and they're recipients of money from, guess what? USAID. So this is a really an interesting look at who are these Democrats turning out in public? And they are people who, I think in California, are only going to make things worse if they remain in control, because they are ideologues. They are hard ideologues.
Well, look what's happened nationwide. Polls that profess to reflect the entire citizenry or resident population show that the party, when Trump left office, was about 47% approval, and the Republicans were about 47, 46. And now it's gone down to 27. Mark Penn said this is the most catastrophic, the pollster, Democratic pollster, that he's seen. But this is what's interesting. Of the people who are as Democrats, 65% are very unhappy because the party is not radical enough. So it's already isolated from the population. If you only have a quarter, and 3/4 of that quarter you only have a quarter because you're too radical, but 3/4 of the quarter, that's that remnant stump, still wants to get more and more and more radical. So if they were to nominate somebody like AOC, she would have two choices. She would have to lie like Kamala Harris did and say she's for fracking, she's for closed borders, but I don't think she could do that very well given her loud public record. And no one would go for that agenda. The only way that they can get that left-wing agenda, they need to get charismatic people. So Bill Clinton can nod and be kind of centrist for a while, then sneak the left-wing stuff through. Hillary couldn't do it. She was completely a forced detractor from the message. Obama could. Hope and change, and we're here. We're going to get some hope and change for everybody, and I'm going to spread the wealth, that kind of stuff. And then they had Joe Biden. He was a negative. So most of the time, they're not going to have a JFK or Bill Clinton or Obama megaphone. They have that message, which is basically a socialist message, socialism. That's what it is.
It's more of a Marxist message. I would
I'm being
a little bit.
National.
Being kind.
I don't know what it is, but it's redistribution and take from one group and give to the other, and the people taking it are not going to be subject to what they're doing.
You're the student of history, and a small group of ideologues. Look what happened with Russia. A small group of ideologues egged on by elites.
But it always happens in quite a different way. The Bolsheviks, yes, the Mensheviks were greater, and the White Russians were before the revolutions. I mean, in the first 1905 and the 1917, there was still a population that wanted a constitutional monarchy. And then the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks wanted a revolution. Okay, then the Bolsheviks liquidated the Mensheviks and got rid of the white. Okay, and they were a small, you're right, 20% support. Or I shouldn't say support, but they made up of the resistance or the anti-Tsarist movement. Same thing happened in Nazi Germany. Hindenburg won the election. Hitler got 33% of the vote. Okay, same thing with Mao, same thing with all of these movements. The French Revolution, the Thermidors, that Robespierre, when they eliminated the Girondists, they were a minority. But the minority cannot take power unless the majority allows them to. And that was the key. The aristocratic Russians felt that it was kind of cool to, wear a beard and say you were for or something like that. They didn't believe in their own values. And it's the same thing with this hard left. They, for 120 days, destroyed this country in May, June, July, August, September. And I know January 6th was stupid and everything, but if you compare the number of people who were killed or the property damage or the length of the time or whatever, the damage they did comparing to burning a federal courthouse or police precinct or swarming, trying to get the White House, or 35 people killed or $2 billion in property damage, whatever it is, that they did that with impunity because most people were scared or they supported it. And I was thinking that the other day. You remember when the George Floyd rioting started, and all of a sudden all these health workers who for over a year and a half that you were going to be arrested if you didn't wear a mask. Or they just came out, and there was like 70,000 in Minnesota or places demonstrating, and they wrote all these little letters. We think it's injurious to the public health if you don't demonstrate on behalf of the George. Remember that? They just made a mockery of it. And so it was the average person that allowed these people to take over. And I can remember the first time I got an email from our provost, and it said they or theirs or Z or Z. I said, what the hell is this? And somebody said, well, don't you should list your pronouns. What? List your pronouns. Just do it. Just do it. And so it was Donald Trump was that guy, and that woman, that figure in that famous 1984 that ran down that Orwellian audience and threw that ball and chain into that computer screen and shattered it. And then all of a sudden, wow, no, none of this. We were all crazy, but we weren't crazy. We allowed it to happen. And
exactly.
We had certain values that said you don't discriminate against people on their religion or their basis of their superficial appearance. You treat everybody the same. People don't have demographic parity. Is one group doesn't do it, other than we try to work at K through 12 and help people. But you don't discriminate, period. And you don't defund the police, and you arrest somebody that hits somebody, and you arraign them, and you try to convict them if they're guilty. We had all these values. They just threw them away. And what did they give us? They gave us nothing in return but debt and violence and chaos. I mean, you know, that
Victor,
whole thing about Leah Thomas, everybody knew that, Leah Thomas, right? When you saw that huge man and you saw these diminutive women who'd spent their whole lives trying to master the sport, and this guy, this mediocre athlete, just goes, I'd have no problem with his transitioning. That's fine. If he thinks he's a woman, or he was a woman, or he's suffering from, that's great. But you don't use your biological framework to destroy the competition.
But where was the courage of the
there was no one.
You say before, let things happen. Where were the parents of the other girls on that team? The fathers get up and say, over my dead body, we're going to let this happen. And if I could screed a second here, Victor,
I said to a colleague, I think whatever you believe in Scott Atlas, and of course I believe that he was correct, and events proved that he was correct, that the lockdown and the national quarantine would have more deleterious effects and consequences than targeting the elderly and the vulnerable, but otherwise keeping the economy open to prevent spousal abuse, educational, disastrous lapses, etc. But when I would talk to people, I think I wrote 3 columns to that effect, that he should be supported. Well, I don't know. Maybe he's right, maybe, but I'm not going to. That's the problem, and nobody speaks up. And
exactly.
You'll lose the country if you don't. And everybody, each according to their station, has a role to play. And there was
we can't take consolation in these poll numbers, right? Because if you're a conservative, like, look, they're on the run.
Did you see that study by I don't know if he's related to your former writer when you were publisher of National Review, Shore, but he did a poll the other day.
Isaac Shore?
Yeah, no. But I don't think it's Isaac. I think it's another fellow named Shore. And he just did a poll about what would happen if the people who voted in 2022 had all turned out in 2024. But then he did another take on it. What would happen if the putative Trump voter had turned out? In other words, was the old standby was that the Trump voters are overrepresented in their demographics, that more people will come out to vote for Trump than are actually representative of the whole population. And he found just the opposite. If everybody who wanted to vote for Harris had registered and voted, and everybody who polled that they wanted Trump Trump would have won by 5 points. By 5 points, not just 1.7. So the point I'm making is that all of you are listening, you're the majority. You really are. You're the ones that other fringe group that's trying to radically overturn society. It doesn't mean that they won't succeed, but they don't have to succeed. It's not inevitable. They're not the majority. And They could be
Amen.
countered. And what we're seeing right now is a counter-revolution. It's very fascinating to watch. Donald Trump is saying, I didn't do it last time, but I'm going to try to change law. I'm going to try to change the media. I'm going to try to change government spending. I'm going to try to change medicine. I'm going to try to change the universities. Because if I don't, it leads to $36 trillion in debt and China taking over everything and a sectarian, factional country that is divided by race and gender and ideology, and it leads nowhere.
We've come close to it, Victor. But speaking of coming close, we have come close to the end. You got a hard stop.
Yeah.
We have to end this. So we will talk about big law on our next when we record again, because there's some great stuff Donald Trump has done with some of these massive law firms and the risk of the big law that it is posing to America. Always at the end of the show, read a comment, and here's one that I think is from Apple. Folks can rate the show on Apple, and thanks for those who do. It's titled Refreshing. Thank you for being just a regular person, Victor. I've only discovered you as a political commentator. A couple of years ago, I was immediately struck by your candor and common sense approach to real issues people face every day. I listen to your podcast while I work on the farm, and I send as many people as I can to listen to your podcast and commentary. We could use more level-headed people like you in the public sector. Victor, 2028. No, I'm saying that. Please keep being a real person. No. Mike from Ohio. Thanks, Mike. Thanks to the folks who go to civilthoughts.com, sign up for the email I send out every Friday of 14 recommended readings. Victor, I know we've got to, and thank you for all the wisdom you've shared today, and thanks for being still alive and
I'm still alive.
Conquering this
17 days since I got sick. I got sick at Hillsdale College.
Well, but you will persevere. My friend,
I will persevere. I'm on the mend. Okay, thank you everybody for listening. It's much appreciated. Take care.
God bless. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Bye.
Thank you.